We now come to the backbench debate on the potential merits of awarding a posthumous Victoria Cross to Blair Mayne. Jim Shannon to move.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I move that the potential merits of awarding a posthumous Victoria Cross to Blair Mayne be considered. First of all, can I just say, Madam Deputy Speaker, pleasure to serve under your chairship. Can I thank the Backbench Committee very much for the opportunity, and I thank those members who have taken the time before recess to come in and make a contribution. And truly I'm thankful for the recognition of the importance of this debate in this chamber today. This is not merely about a Newtownards boy and his exploits, which I will tell. This is about how we as a House honour our veteran sea heroes and ensure that the honour is properly recorded. At a time when veterans feel that their service is a thing of shame, the importance of this recognition goes to every service personnel member throughout this country. I know that means so much to so many in Newtownards, in my hometown of Strangford, and I'm thankful it's been deemed worthy of this debate here in the greatest seat of democracy. Just say I'm very pleased to see the Minister in his place, the honourable and gallant honourable member that he is, and we thank him for coming along. And also pleased to see the two shadow ministers in their place as well. I'm no writer, Madam Deputy Speaker. Damien Lewis, whose work in Blair Mayne and the foundation of the SAS, is unparalleled. However, allow this Ballywalter boy to retell the stories I heard by old men in the town, rhyme off in my youth as a crowd of us listened in awe of how one of us could achieve so much. If you were 8, 9, 10-year-old and you had all these old soldiers in the Second World War and they were telling you all these great stories and you just always wanted to be a Royal Marine, as I did as a wee boy, I wanted to be a Royal Marine Commando. I never achieved that, by the way. The honourable gentleman did, and I managed to get to the Ulster Defence Regiment and the Royal Artillery. And they weren't second best, by the way, but weren't as good as what I wanted as an 8-year-old. But when you listen to the stories of those soldiers, I asked members to very quickly, in a brief moment, a scene of what happened. The air is filled with the screams of dying and the stench of the dead. You're gasping for breath as your lungs intake gulps of gunpowder-tinged air. You're lying in a ditch. The enemy is firing so often without break that the rat-tat-tat of bullets emerges together. You know that each searing breath may well be your last. The officer you look for direction is dead. Deep in your heart, you believe that it will take a miracle to lift you from this scene of hell. Suddenly, you hear something different. You hear the roaring of an engine, of a jeep. With your last vestige of energy, you lift your head with stinging eyes. You make out the form of a jeep that is cutting through the madness and the mayhem. The man on board fires at the enemy like an avenging angel. He slows down the jeep down to the ditch. On his way past, he calls, "I'll pick you up on the way back." Nothing flowery, no grand words, just a promise that he gives you that perhaps it is not time for you to go just yet. With a hammering heart, you watch as the man in the jeep forces the enemy to retreat, despite the fact that the enemy holds all the advantages of position, men and firepower. And as the enemy retreats, the jeep turns round. This time it stops. The avenging angel jumps to the ground amid a hail of bullets and holds out his hand. Shaking, you grasp that hand as you're bundled in with your 11 colleagues and driven widely to safety. As you look to see what form your angel takes, you see this a crazy Ulster man. We're not all crazy, by the way, but we're all very brave. I wouldn't be as brave as this man. It is Paddy Mayne, and everything falls into place just in that 1 second. It's a man who is known for bravery and courage and for leading his men to victory. A man who is, and in your eyes and the eyes of your surviving family, will forever remain a hero of epic fame. The story is one of the true stories of Lieutenant Colonel Paddy Blair Mayne. Actions are seen from one of the men who was saved by Colonel Mayne, or Paddy as he was affectionately known. The story does not take into account the fact that before Colonel Mayne and Lieutenant Scott had driven the jeep into oncoming enemy fire, Mayne had summed up the city. That was what he could do. He could lead from the front as a soldier, as a leader of soldiers, but also with the courage and determination. He was a man who was born for that time. Ever a man of initiative and action, he entered the first house that had formed the enemy defences, and after checking to ensure that the enemy was dead, he moved out into the open and fired into the next house, taking out those behind the enemy fire before moving in to ensure that none of the enemy remained. That man, that colossus of a man, was Paddy Blair Mayne. Stood tall and commanded his men, and inspired bravery and loyalty. After ensuring that clean sweep, he turned his attention to how best to save the trapped men, point men of the squadron. He knew that the enemy was well ensconced in the forest, and with no way to surround them, he departed on what seemed to be a suicide mission in order to rescue those men. Not only did Paddy manage to rescue his colleagues, but he forced a retreat from the enemy, and he helped the Allies advance
at a time when they were held up. So it's said that a level 1 award such as the Victoria Cross is only given when the chance of death is 50%. A report from Brigadier Calvert in June 45 said, there can only be one explanation why Colonel Mayne was not killed by what already had proved deadly and concentrated fire. The sheer audacity and daring which he showed in driving his jeep across a field of fire, momentarily bewildering the enemy. He also continued, Colonel Mayne, from the time he arrived, dominated the scene. That was the man he was. When he was there, he had no fear. His cheerfulness always, his resolution, his unsurpassed courage in this action was an inspiration to us all. That was the soldiers who watched this colossus of a man jump out and save them and rescue them and win the day for the Allies in their advance in Germany. Undoubtedly, it was a suicidal mission to rescue his comrades and ensure that the enemy retreated further. Colonel Mayne's mission was a complete success. In the words of Brigadier Calvert, he said, not only did he save the lives of the wounded, but he also completely defeated and destroyed the enemy. That's the man. Colonel Mayne's story is the stuff of which legends are made. Legends that we know to be true, but we as boys in Newtownards and Ballywalter many years ago looked to that to be that person. It's the stuff of which many of us dreamed as young boys and acted out in our gardens. Blair Mayne was certainly a hero of mine as a young child many years ago. His actions were those of a man who put others first, and he did do that and went above and beyond the call of duty. There's absolutely no doubt that his actions on that day were heroic and worthy of recognition and commendation. And that is why Brigadier Calvert recommended that Mayne be awarded the highest award, the Victoria Cross. Mayne was informed that he was to be granted that well-deserved accolade, and he informed his mother accordingly, which made, of course, his mum even more proud. And who's more proud of you than your mum? Whatever you do is just great, because your mum thinks whatever you do is brilliant. And that's, my mum's the same. But, I hope it's true, by the way. I shall explain why I've told the war story. There's a reason for it. I want to do that because it's a factual historical account. Why the BBC have a global success in their Rogue Heroes dramatisation about a founding member of a covert special raiding squadron, a hero many times over, who reputed to have single-handedly destroyed 130 enemy planes and was commended for the highest military award. The reason is that 6 months later, a terrible mistake happened. The mistake stripped Blair Mayne of his hard-won honour and much of his self-esteem. The award of Victoria Cross by the 1931 Royal Warrant is bestowed upon those who display acts of conspicuous gallantry and for a signal act of valour in the presence of the enemy. Paddy Mayne more than attained that standard. But the mistake lies with the word signal, which is defined in the Oxford English Dictionary as an event or a statement that provides the impulse or occasion for something to happen. So it was not a planned event. Mayne certainly qualified for the award. However, the word signal was misread as single. Now, as a clerical error, and we're very clearly putting forward this viewpoint, Mayne had been accompanied in the jeep by Lieutenant Scott, who provided covering fire and therefore had not acted single-handedly, which meant that he was deemed to be ineligible for the award. The change has been queried at a number of levels over the years, and yet it appears that alteration resulted in Mayne being stripped of the award. Instead, he was given a third bar to his DSO. I have seen the evidence. Lieutenant Colonel Blair Mayne was supposed to get the Victoria Cross. On his citation, VC was marked but stroked out for the commendation. That is important evidence. A team of historians have been working hard in sourcing these documents, and I've made them available to the Minister this morning, although to be fair, I think the Minister had them beforehand, so he's got 2 copies of it now in relation to it. I cry the thanks, and I want to put on record the thanks to Damien Lewis, to Patrick McGonigal, who's a grandson of one of the SAS originals, and David Robinson, among so many other local historians invested in this issue. Brigadier Calvert recommended Mayne should be awarded the VC for his actions in rescuing his men. He submitted signed statements from 3 officers who witnessed it: Lieutenant Scott, Lieutenant Lockhart and Lieutenant Surrey Dane. Calvert refers to the difficulty of assessing the military significance of Mayne's actions in relation to the overall thrust of the Canadian Division. I enclose a citation to the VC for Paddy Mayne. I quote, "I've gone into this thoroughly with his officers, and I think it was an outstanding piece of work. One almost expects these things from Paddy Mayne. The main point is, however, is how much it affected the battle." Simmons agreed with him. Major General Vokes also wrote in support of the citation. In his opinion, Mayne's spirited leadership and dash were a most important contribution to the success of the operation. And I observed the very marked respect and regard in which he was held by his officers and men. In my opinion, the officer is worthy of the highest award for gallantry and leadership. Whether rogue heroes in TV, Madam Deputy Speaker, really betrayed Blair Mayne in the way he should have been. He never used bad language, for instance, but he was portrayed as a leader of men, and nobody could ever have any doubt that he was a man that led his soldiers and give leadership and give confidence and encouragement to those who were around him. The citation was also signed by Brigadier Calvert, Major General Vokes, Lieutenant General Simmons, General Greyhard, Commander 1st Canadian Army, and Field Marshal Montgomery, 21st Army Group. It says here, I have clearly outlined that officials overseeing misinterpreted the VC rules as it needed to be a single act of valour, whereas it was in fact a signal act of valour. The difference is in that wording. We're not here to throw dispersions, we're here to outline the system and how it works and how clerical error led to this happening. That means the denial was based upon a procedural error or an error of misunderstanding, and therefore the wrongdoing that needs to be properly readdressed. One historian has noted it was clear that the VC had been marked out because of that clerical error. Therefore, Madam, I do think it's important that we note that I seek not to ask the MOD or Magistrate to overturn the entire apple cart of no retrospective reconsiderations. We are simply asking for an error to be corrected in this case, specifically, singularly. Whilst we are all aware of other posthumous VCs being granted, for instance, Private Richard Norton was posthumously awarded the Victoria Cross for Australia VC for his bravery during the Second World War. His bravery during the Vietnam War, specifically for his actions during the Battle of Fire Support Base Coral in 1968. The basis is that an error occurred which can be corrected. We're not the only people who cannot understand why the medal was not awarded. King George the Sixth asked, how was it that the Victoria Cross eluded Paddy? And he inquired as to why the award was downgraded. When the King asked Winston Churchill to explain the demerit, Churchill was said to have been shocked and saddened by the glaring omission. Inquiries were also made by several officers who also could not understand what had happened. They did not have the access that we now have to the files, which clearly show the intent and the redirect. In short, while a signal act of valour was originally specified, a single act of valour never was. So the clerical error is the reason and the thrust of what we're asking for. For most conspicuous bravery or some daring or preeminent act of valour or self-sacrifice or extreme devotion to duty in the presence of the enemy. What a man and what a hero and what a courageous person with bravery many will never witness, but that I as a wee boy just wish to be. All of which were confirmed by the witnesses involved in reporting on Blair's actions at Oldenburg, and thirdly, that the VC can be awarded posthumously. So those three reasons, the single word, but also the VC would be awarded for conspicuous bravery, which is never in doubt, and the Victoria Cross can be awarded posthumously. There are no other recorded reasons as to why the recommendations to award a VC was not actioned. Her late Majesty Queen Elizabeth's uncle, Major General Sir Robert Laycock, who at the time was a serving officer in the forces, wrote a letter in which he stated that Blair Mayne deserved the Victoria Cross. He earned it. He earned it with his bravery, and would have received one had the proper authorities, specifically, I say this very respectfully, always do that, knowing their job. As a consequence, Blair Mayne did not receive the greatest honour that his country can bestow. No matter how much being awarded the highest French allocated meant to have been given and then stripped of, his British honour haunted Mayne for the rest of his life. The memory of Blair Mayne lies on, not just through the BBC series, but many in my town argue that whilst Blair Mayne was rough, he would have never have cursed in front of a lady, and his comrades did not fear, but instead revered him. Indeed, his memory is cherished in Ard's people's hearts, and there's a statue of Blair Mayne in Newton Ard's town centre. His image now adorns walls that once boasted murals depicting paramilitary paraphernalia. Blair Mayne's history, his service in uniform, his bravery and his conviction are on the walls of Newton Ard and many of the community centres. When the council decided to build a new leisure centre, it was named the Blair Mayne Leisure Centre. Why? His sporting prowess is something of pride to us all. When a coffee shop opened a couple of years ago in Newton Ard's town centre, was called Colonel Paddy's. Why? Because we all revere him and their coffee, by the way, is excellent, and I live in coffee and fried eggs. So this is because his legacy is important to the people of our wee town. Members may be aware that under Rule 40.12 of the Civil Procedure Clerk, clerical mistakes in judgments or orders or errors arising from any accidental slip or omission explicitly permits fixing such errors. This is really important. This is the thrust of the debate and why we're bringing it forward. As long as the intent of the original decision holds. So the original decision was to allow the VC. The law allows for slips of the pen to be corrected. Letting an error stand, as in this case, perpetuates, I believe, an injustice, especially if the mistake skewed the outcome which it has. I conclude with this. I'm very clear of the time that you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and others asked me to conform within, and I'll do that. It is said that King George VI asked him how it was that he had not received the Victoria Cross, and he answered in a manner, I believe, that sums up this courageous and honourable man, as he was. I serve to my best, my Lord, my King and my Queen, and none can take that honour away from me. Today, in this House, Madam Deputy Speaker, we have a chance to restore and replace that which was his. It is time that the memory of a man who lived for his colleagues and his country was restored to its full glory through the restitution of the Victoria Cross.
The question is, as on the order paper. Dr Scott Arthur.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I thank the Honourable Member for Strangford for both securing this debate and opening it in such a way. I know this is an incredibly important subject to him, and his retelling of Paddy's activities during war, it was almost like I could almost see the commando comic before me from my childhood. So well done for the way you did it. I don't intend to speak too long. It's really just a long intervention I have here. So the member for Strangford asked me to support this debate. I didn't really know who Paddy Mayne was. And I have to say, whilst the member for Strangford is a lovely guy, his politics can be a little bit dodgy sometimes. So rather than saying yes on the spot, I did decide to do some homework. And you could see quite quickly that the case is strong, of course. And I felt bad even having to research it, actually. I spoke to my son when I got home that week, and he did very politely point out to me that we'd watched a TV programme about Paddy Mayne together, and also my son had bought me a book for my Christmas about Paddy Mayne, which I've still not read. But don't tell him. And then the week after that, I was visiting Redford Barracks in Edinburgh South West, and I met a serviceman there from Northern Ireland, and I took the opportunity to ask him what he thought. And he was offended that I even had to ask him about it because he felt the case was so strong. And whilst I don't speak for him, he was a little bit upset about the way Paddy was depicted in the second of the Rogue Heroes series, actually. And he made the point about the language specifically. I've asked residents in my constituency what they thought about this debate today and what the trajectory should be. And overwhelmingly, people did get back and say the case was strong. There was a real feeling that Paddy was overlooked because he was sometimes forthright with his opinions, sometimes challenged authority, which is not always a good thing in the forces, I guess, but above all because his face didn't fit sometimes. And one of my constituents did say to me, they said that Paddy deserves this, but if he does win it, it's a victory for all the other people who were overlooked because they went to the wrong school or came from the wrong background, and that counted against them. So I think I'm very happy to give way.
Can I thank my honourable friend for giving way? I think, like him, I would agree with the need to make sure research is done. And actually, for this, the podcast, We Have Ways of Making You Talk, does a much better introduction to Paddy Mayne. But my main intervention is, does he agree with me that actually what we need to be making sure we're looking at the moment as well, picking up his point, look at the current rules of recognition for those serving in the Special Forces and making sure some of the difficulties that will arise with public recognition for these very brave troops are taken into account going forward?
Dr Scott Arthur.
I thank my honourable friend for his intervention in it, and I'll try to listen to that podcast on the train home this evening. But, I mean, the issue around Special Forces does often come up, but I mean, I have absolute trust in them to follow the rules of engagement and also the rules of war at all times, and I respect them and all our armed forces for the work they do. So the case is strong, and I just want to conclude by saying that we're not here today, of course, to demand that Paddy gets a VC on behalf of himself or of all these other people who are perhaps been overlooked, particularly in the year which is the 80th anniversary of the Second World War, of course. What we're here today saying is it's time to look at this with fresh eyes. Formally, not here in this House, but people who understand this much better than us, and ensure that a fair decision is reached. But I do think the member for Strangford has been very clear about perhaps what that fair decision should be. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker.
Robin Swann.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I rise today to support the Honourable Member for Strangford in his call for those potential merits of awarding a posthumous VC to Blair Mayne. Because today, Madam Deputy Speaker, we speak about a man whose courage and leadership actually helped shape one of the most elite fighting forces in the world, and indeed Lieutenant Colonel Blair Mayne of the SAS. And though his name is now etched in military history, one honour that eluded him is the Victoria Cross, and I think today's debate allows us the opportunity to look at those circumstances and potentially correct that. Because Mayne, as the Honourable Member for Strangford has said, was a soldier of a rare calibre. As one of the founding members of the SAS, he led countless raids deep behind enemy lines in North Africa and Europe, often at great personal risk. He led from the front, destroying enemy aircraft, supply lines and infrastructure, often with nothing more than a small group of men and his sheer willpower. His character and indeed courage are legendary. But that has, and I think already has been mentioned, has been coloured and to an extent misrepresented in the recent BBC series due to what has been artistic licence. But I want this House just to consider, in regards while we consider the merits of awarding the posthumous VC, to actually reflect on the citations from his DSO. The first DSO awarded February 24th, 42, for his leadership during a raid on the Tamat airfield in Libya. And the quote is, "The task set was of the most hazardous nature, and it was due to this officer's courage and leadership that success was achieved." The first bar to the DSO then awarded on October 21, 1943, for recognising his actions during Operation Husky in Sicily. The citation in both these operations, it was Major Mayne's courage, determination and superb leadership which provided the key to success. The second bar to his DSO, March 29, 1945, was for his command of the 1st SAS Regiment in France, which coordinated operations with the French resistance. The citation, it was entirely due to Lieutenant Colonel Mayne's fine leadership and example, and his utter disregard for danger, that the unit was able to achieve such a striking success. The third bar to his DSO, Mayne was recommended actually, and it wasn't that vivid recount from the Honourable Member from Strangford, where Mayne was recommended for actually the Victoria Cross for his actions in Germany in April 45, where he rescued wounded men and eliminated enemy positions under heavy fire. Although the recommendation was downgraded, as is the subject of this debate today, resulting in the third bar of his DSO. That citation said Lieutenant Colonel Mayne was in full view of the enemy and exposed to fire from small arms, machine guns, sniper fires and Passenfasts. He then seized a Brain gun and magazines and single-handedly fired burst after burst into a second house, killing or wounding the enemy there. Madam Deputy Speaker, if that does not meet the standard for the Victoria Cross, then we need to severely ask what does. Some say it's too late, that we cannot rewrite history, but this isn't about rewriting history, it's about righting a wrong. Awarding Blair Mayne the VC posthumously is not just about a medal, it's about honouring a man whose valour was undeniable, whose actions inspired those around him, and whose legacy still lives on. So let us act today not for glory, but for justice, and for Paddy Mayne. Speaker, thank you.
Alison Hume.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I would like to draw members' attention to my membership of the Writers' Guild of Great Britain. I'm delighted to be called to speak in this debate on the potential merits of awarding a posthumous Victoria Cross to Lieutenant Colonel Robert Blair Mayne, best known as Paddy Mayne. I know this is an issue the Honourable Member for Strangford feels passionately about and he's spoken very eloquently today. And I have to say that as a member of the Backbench Business Committee, which hears applications from backbenchers on all kinds of topics, this one caught my particular attention. As a television screenwriter before I was proudly elected to this place, I'm a huge fan of the hit TV drama SAS Rogue Heroes, created and written by Stephen Wright. The vivid retelling of the story of the formation and achievements of Britain's Special Air Service, or SAS, who were formed by David Stirling as the ultimate military disruptors and who changed the nature of the Second World War against the Nazis in Africa and beyond, is amongst the best examples of why the United Kingdom is a powerhouse of the creative industries. The writer, cast and crew of SAS Rogue Heroes, working for Kudos Productions, created a hit show which captured the irreverence, humour and bravery of the SAS and retold the story of the brave men for a new generation. Madam Deputy Speaker, I am sure as I make this speech, bots will be crawling over Stephen's fantastic script to train AI models, just like they have crawled over my scripts, and that of thousands and millions of screenwriters. The bots stealing copyrighted material, hard-written and hard-won by real humans, scraping it from under our noses without permission to make money for their AI companies. If only we had the AI equivalent of SAS Rogue Heroes and the likes of Paddy Mayne to protect us. But honourable members will just have to rely on something a little more tame, but which still has teeth, and that's good legislation. Paddy Mayne is unforgettably played in the series by Jack O'Connell, bringing the character to vivid life. The producer of the show, Stephen Smallwood, told me that shooting in the Sahara Desert in July at 50 degrees made O'Connell and the other actors think that they were just as hardcore as the SAS, until they were reminded that they had an air-conditioned hotel and a cold beer to return to that night. The conditions that Paddy Mayne and his colleagues operated in were truly beyond anything that we can imagine now. The raids that Paddy led in Libya, followed by legendary outings in Italy and Sicily before he demonstrated outstanding courage by rescuing wounded men trapped in a Nazi ambush, clearing a machine gun position and clearing a path for the Allied advance, us truly the stuff of legend. And it was this outstanding bravery which earned him a citation for a Victoria Cross, which was downgraded to a Distinguished Service Order, his fourth, and this has caused puzzlement ever since. Although Lieutenant Colonel Mayne was one of the very few recipients of a rare third bar to the DSO, my honourable friend for Strangford is not alone in thinking that this is not enough, and that he should be posthumously awarded the Victoria Cross. But as I understand, it is a key tenet of the British Honours and Awards system that they are not granted retrospectively, so that decisions made by peers and commanders at the time are respected. How and why the citation was overturned may never now be fully understood, but I would say to the honourable member, although the pen strokes of a bureaucrat may be lost in the mists of time, Paddy Mayne's legacy lives on in the democracy and the values that we now take for granted, but were won by the sacrifices of Mayne's fallen colleagues and the wider armed forces. His legacy lives on in the celebrations next month, when we will mark the 80th anniversaries of victory in Europe, and then in August, VJ Day, commemorating the end of the Second World War. If he were alive today, I am sure Paddy Mayne would be looking to us in this place to do right by the men and women who serve and risk their lives for this country. And I'm proud to be part of a government committed to strengthening support for our veterans and armed forces community by putting the Armed Forces Covenant fully into law and ensuring that veterans have secure homes. To conclude, Madam Deputy Speaker, millions of people around the world have now learnt about Paddy Mayne's courage and leadership through the TV show. 70 years after his untimely death, Paddy Mayne has officially passed into legend, and his phenomenal bravery will live on forever in the motto of the SAS, who dares wins.
Carla Lockhart.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And today I rise to speak about a man whose name is etched into the very DNA of the British Special Forces, a man of exceptional courage, legendary leadership and unrelenting service to this country, Lieutenant Colonel Robert Blair, affectionately known as Paddy Mayne. I want to commend the honourable member for securing this debate. No better man to take it forward and to try and right the wrong that was served to Paddy Blair Mayne. Mighty men have came from Newton Ards in the form of Paddy Blair Mayne and in the form of the honourable member. In Northern Ireland we talk about a rough cut diamond, and Paddy Blair Mayne was just that. He was certainly not perfect, and none of us sitting here today, well, none of us are perfect, but he, when it comes to his service, he certainly led from the front and was a mighty man. He was one of the founding pillars of the Special Air Service, the SAS, and helped build it into the elite force we know and revere today. His leadership during World War II changed the course of modern warfare. He was a warrior in the truest of sense, fearless, inventive, and utterly devoted to his men. Mayne was awarded the Distinguished Service Order not once but 4 times, an almost unheard of honour. He was a man who led from the front, a man who raided behind enemy lines with such ferocity and tactical genius that even his enemies respected him. He destroyed over 100 aircraft in daring missions across North Africa. He risked everything, time and again, not for medals, not for recognition, but because it was his duty. And yet, Madam Deputy Speaker, despite all of this, despite the eyewitness accounts of unimaginable bravery under fire, despite the legacy he left behind in the SAS and British military history, he was denied the Victoria Cross. And this wrong has never been made right and is a lingering, grave injustice. The Victoria Cross is the highest award for gallantry in the face of the enemy. It is meant to honour, and I quote, the most conspicuous bravery, a daring or pre-eminent act of valour or self-sacrifice. Paddy Mayne was the very embodiment of those words. But this is not just about righting wrong from the past. This is about recognising what he gave up. He led from the front while others hesitated. He put his own life on the line so his men could return home. And his story, his example, has inspired generations of servicemen and women. Madam Deputy Speaker, this is not a matter of sentiment, it's a matter of principle. Yeah. It is time this country honours him, not just with words, not just with statues or stories, but with the medal he so clearly earned. I urge the Minister to reconsider this case with the seriousness and urgency it deserves. Lieutenant Colonel Paddy Mayne is a national hero. He gave us all, and now, long overdue, his country must give him the recognition he deserves, the Victoria Cross. Thank you.
Thank you.
Lee Pitcher.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and thank you to the member of Strangford for being able to host this debate today. Now, the award of the Victoria Cross has an extraordinary impact on individuals, on families, friends and communities, and I'd like to give an example of my own in the town of Hatfield Woodhouse, where we were proud to produce Corporal John William Harper, VC. Now, Corporal Harper served in the 4th Battalion, York and Lancaster Regiment, British Army during the Second World War, and on the 29th of September 1944, he led his section in an assault over open ground against a fortified position, leading from the front and repeatedly moving forward alone to establish the way forward before exposing his own comrades to danger. Corporal Harper was fatally wounded in the assault, unfortunately, but his action secured the success of the attack. Now, Hatfield remembers Corporal Harper by maintaining a twinning arrangement with the town of Merklas in Belgium, where the corporate's gallantry took place, but memorials of him can be seen at a local St Lawrence church and at the war graves, and local children still learn about Harper VC at schools in Merklas and in Donny today. And even in the last few years, a new extension to Hatfield area was named Harper's Eve in his honour, showing that the memory is still important to the people of the town. Now, why this is important and part of today's debate is that as time moves on and new generations are born, the story of the Victoria Cross and of the legend who receives it means that we never forget. We never forget their gallantry, but we never forget the gallantry of all of those people that have served us. And this is why the Victoria Cross Award can make all the difference, recognising a hero like Blair Mayne, who sacrificed so much for others, but also for the pride that it brings to the community. And regardless of what the Minister says today, I am so pleased for the member opposite, who I call my friend, that he's been able to raise it today, and Blair Mayne's efforts will be recognised in the Chamber and will be remembered forever.
John Cooper.
Speaker, thank you, and congratulate my neighbour, the Honourable Member for Strangford, on securing this important debate, and you could almost smell the cordite in his opening remarks. My first encounter with the Special Air Service was when, just as we were getting to the good bit, the John Wayne film was interrupted on TV, and it was over to Kate Adie as men in bug-eyed respirators ended the Iranian embassy siege on 5th May 1980 amid the thunder of flashbangs and the staccato rattle of small arms fire. As a journalist, I later met John McAleese, who really was the man on the balcony, and not, hate to break it to you, that bloke down the pub mumbling about the colour of the boathouse at Hereford, as Walter Mitty characters do. I also became friends with Colonel Clive Fairweather, second in command of the regiment. Sadly, both men are no longer with us, but in life one thing was obvious: neither was a reckless psychopath. Hard men, yes, of course, for theirs is a lethal business. But rather more planning and preparation goes into Tier 1 Special Forces than novels and TV would have you believe. Controversy reigns over television's brilliant SAS rogue heroes and Blair Paddy Mayne's depiction. It's nothing new. There were all sorts of claims about the book Bravo 20 when it emerged after the first Gulf War. Fact or fantasy? Peter Billy Rat Ratcliffe, former Regimental Sergeant Major of 22 SAS, told me, "Life in the regiment is not really about garrotting 200 sentries, you know." "But you do know how to garrot a sentry, don't you?" I asked. In his Salford accent, he told me, "Oh yeah, but I'd rather shoot you from a mile away, less chance of being compromised." Uncompromising, but careful, thoughtful and cunning too. And as such, these men are surely the inheritors of the spirit of Blair Mayne. For certain, he could be a wild man, especially in drink. There is a cottage on the Isle of Arran pockmarked yet by rounds fired from his service revolver after a surfeit of whisky. But it fell to Mayne to protect and indeed nurture the nascent SAS when founder Sir David Stirling was a POW in Italy and the infamous Colditz. If Mayne were as unhinged as portrayed, he would not have been able to apply the quiet discipline needed to forge a bunch of rogues into an effective and elite fighting force. Madam Deputy Speaker, it strikes me that the only recklessness Blair Mayne displayed was for his own safety, never that of his men, his blades, as SAS troopers are known. Concerning us today is the action at Oldenburg on 9th April 1945, but let me be clear here, this is not football-style VAR for gallantry medals. We are not reopening cases by the dozen, but just this oddity. We may never know what precisely happened there almost 80 years ago to the day. We do know Mayne was recommended for the VC, and his audacity was the only thing said to have kept him alive. We also may never learn what made the authorities downgrade that VC. Professional jealousy? Special Forces face that today. The sobriquet, the Hereford Hooligans, is unfairly appended to the SAS in many a mess, and SF officers who ought to be generals somehow don't make the cut. Mayne's hand shaped the SAS, and the regiment in turn has guided Special Forces around the globe. US Major Charles Blisters Beckwith raised the Delta Force. He promised it will get you a medal or a body bag, maybe both, after time spent with the SAS. Mayne's legacy is then secure, and there is no doubting his courage. And we are not here to critique SAS rogue heroes. It's fun, great soundtrack, great acting, but the accents are as sketchy as the history. Instead, we should coolly examine the real Major Mayne and examine why that VC was approved by all who mattered, but rescinded in murky circumstances. Mr. Speaker, Madam Deputy Speaker, I am a student of military history, having undertaken a distance learning MA with the excellent University of Birmingham. One of the first lessons learned is that history is not fixed, it's not preserved in aspect. It shifts and changes as new details and new perspectives open. Look at the so-called chateau generals, men who in life were highly rated by their troops, only to later be accused of being donkeys leading lions. Aside from those few who think Blackadder goes forth as a documentary, that trope is happily being revisited. And so we should have courage enough ourselves today to look again at the main case. 80 years on, we can sense something odd about the lack of a VC. Signal rather than single, as we have heard? Perhaps. Madam Deputy Speaker, the military splits into two, rat catchers and regulators. We need both. Regulators with their rule books and procedures in time of peace, and maverick rat catchers in time of war. Mayne was a fine rat catcher, and regulators then and now should not stand between him and this country's premier gallantry medal. Thank you.
Dr. Al Pinkerton.
Madam Deputy Speaker, thank you very much. And may I begin by just simply acknowledging the Honourable Member for Strangford for tabling an early day motion and for securing today's important debate. The Honourable Gentleman has supported so many new starters in this House since we joined Parliament, and it's a pleasure to be supporting him in his advocacy of this important cause today. As we've already heard from members across the House, the courage and bravery of Robert Blair Paddy Mayne stands alongside the greatest soldiers of our reckoning, past or present. The heroism that Mayne demonstrated during the Second World War is rightly celebrated, but I want to take a moment, if I may, to shine a light on a lesser-known but remarkable chapter of his life, the work he did with the Falkland Islands Dependency Survey. This chapter reflects his unwavering dedication to service and duty, but also holds a special resonance for me personally. As a recovering academic with strong interest in the UK's overseas territories and as an observer of the 2013 Falklands referendum and as a former Shackleton scholar, I've had the privilege of visiting the Falkland Islands on numerous occasions, most recently in 2023. And during those visits, I've seen for myself firsthand the pristine wilderness, the unparalleled beauty of the island's wildlife, but above all, the unwavering strength of the people who call the Falklands home. Now, in the aftermath of the Second World War, one might have expected Robert Blair Mayne, having given so much in battles and skirmishes, to have sought the comfort of home, family and a well-earned rest. But that's not the direction that he chose. Instead of stepping away from public service, he delayed his return to civilian life and joined the Falkland Islands Dependency Survey, a precursor to what is now known as the British Antarctic Survey. And that survey, which began life as a naval operation in 1943 under the codename Operation Tabarin, had a very important strategic purpose. Whilst its official mission had been to monitor enemy shipping, its true goal was to counter Argentine and Chilean territorial claims in the Antarctic and to assert British sovereignty by establishing manned bases in the region. When the war ended, that operation transitioned into the Falkland Islands Dependency Survey. And in late 1945, 3 former SAS members, including Lieutenant Colonel Blair Mayne, joined the expedition. Led by Naval Surgeon Commander Bingham, Mayne was appointed second in command. This was no ceremonial visit to the Southern Hemisphere. Blair Mayne fully embraced the challenges of the mission. He was active on board the Dependency Survey ship, on the ground and on the ice, participating in the full scope of the expedition, leading dog teams, surveying wildlife and camping in some of the harshest, most isolated conditions imaginable. Mayne's journals and photographs offer a rare glimpse into the lives and work of British explorers, surveyors and scientists in the Southern Hemisphere and Antarctica during the immediate post-war period, revealing not only the isolation of the vast icy landscapes, but also the camaraderie he shared with his comrades. A recurrence of the same camaraderie, of course, that he demonstrated during his active service in Europe and North Africa. It was only a recurring back injury, one sustained during his wartime service, that forced Mayne's early return to the Falklands for medical treatment. Nothing could be done to ease the condition or the pain that he suffered from. And from Port Stanley, Mayne was transported back to England and thence Northern Ireland in the spring of 1946. The injury that cut short his Antarctic service would trouble him for the rest of his life. Still in his 30s and resettled in Northern Ireland, Mayne, a former British and Irish lion, was said to live with such profound and chronic pain that he was unable even to spectate rugby matches from the terraces at Ravenhill. For 80 years, Mayne supporters have remained acutely aware of the injustice that denied the Victoria Cross to this extraordinary man and undisputed national hero. Blair Mayne's legacy is not only of valour in battle, but of unparalleled leadership, courage and sacrifice under the severest of conditions. As Colonel David Stirling, who himself knew something of courage and leadership, noted of Mayne, he had a marvellous nostril. He had a marvellous battle nostril. He could really sense precisely what he had to do in a situation. It wasn't sheer courage, it was sheer technique. Now, today's debate isn't about rewriting history. It concerns the righting of a historic wrong, one that was evident at the time of its making in 1945, and one that has become even clearer with the passage of time and the application of a clear-eyed historical lens. On the 80th anniversary of Mayne's recommendation for the Victoria Cross, and in the 70th anniversary year of Mayne's untimely death in 1955, there would be no better or more appropriate moment for His Majesty's Government to take up the cause and finally award Lieutenant Colonel Robert Blair Mayne the Victoria Cross, a recognition earned in 1945 and which is now 80 years overdue, but we hope not for much longer.
Yeah. Lincoln Jopp.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I hadn't actually intended to speak in this debate, so forgive me for not being as eloquent as other contributors. And it's an honour to follow the member for Surrey, Heath. He mentioned David Stirling, and it would be remiss of me not to mention, particularly whilst wearing this tie, that David Stirling was, of course, the Scots Guard, my own regiment, in which I spent 25 years. I would like to congratulate the member for Strangford for securing this debate. It is, for something that's 80 years too late, it is timely. And he had me, to be perfectly honest, when he said that the King was confused and disappointed that Mayne had not been awarded the Victoria Cross. He had me when he said that Winston Churchill was equally confused, discombobulated and disappointed. And it was the mention of Churchill that had me in mind of a particular Churchill quote about medals, which was that he said, "Medals glitter, but they also cast a shadow." And this has been going round my head as I've been listening to honourable members, such that I went and found the whole quotation. It was from a speech given in this place, March the 22nd, 1944, and I quote, "The object of presenting medals, stars, ribbons..." I'm not going to do an impression, by the way. "The object of presenting medals, stars and ribbons is to give pride and pleasure to those who have deserved them. At the same time, a distinction is something which everybody does not possess. If all have it, it is of less value. A medal glitters, but it also casts a shadow. The way to get rid of shadows is to shine a light. And I welcome the fact that the member for Strangford is shining a full beam light on the case of Paddy Mayne today. And I invite the Minister to continue to shine that light with a review of this case in the cold light of day, such that the Ministry of Defence can reconsider and award Blair Paddy Mayne the Victoria Cross he so richly deserves."
Yeah. Which brings us to the front bench contributions. Liberal Democrat spokesperson Monica Harding.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I want to thank the Honourable Member for Strangford for securing this debate today. On the 8th of May, this House, together with the whole country, will celebrate the 80th anniversary of victory in Europe. This important milestone provides us with a renewed opportunity to reflect on the sacrifices and struggle of that greatest generation, who fought to protect Britain and preserve our freedom and democracy in the face of fascism and tyranny. It is our duty, both in this House and in communities across the UK, to recognise and celebrate the contributions made by our incredible service personnel to the security, defence and prosperity of this country. That must include reflecting on the service of all those current military personnel who protect us today, those living veterans who have finished their time in the armed forces, and those servicemen and women from previous generations who are no longer with us. They are, all of them, bound together by a thread of service and sacrifice for this country, and we must continually renew our gratitude and remembrance of this service. And that is why I welcome today's incredibly valuable debate. It shines a spotlight on the gallantry and heroism of one of the UK's most decorated servicemen, Blair Mayne, whose proposed recognition with a posthumous Victoria Cross I warmly support. As the premier operational gallantry award, it is worthwhile reminding ourselves of the award's requirements. It is awarded for the most conspicuous bravery, or some daring or preeminent act of valour or self-sacrifice, or extreme devotion to duty in the presence of the enemy. It is clear that Blair Mayne personified the highest standards of bravery in the face of the enemy and across his career in the Special Air Service, and on that basis merits the award of the Victoria Cross. Blair Mayne was one of the first leaders of the SAS following its formation in 1941, designed with the intention of conducting guerrilla warfare against the Axis powers, which were, at that time, on their march across Europe, Africa and Asia. The SAS's role in the Second World War was unconventional but crucial. Their work to disrupt operations behind enemy lines, particularly through the use of small-scale raids, intelligence gathering, and support for networks of resistant groups against the fascist occupiers, was vital in undermining the Axis's political and military strength. As part of the then regiment, Mayne showed extraordinary valour and heroism while carrying out dangerous and daring raids in North Africa, Italy and France, harassing Nazi and fascist supply lines. Indeed, in November 1941, Mayne led one of the first SAS missions considered to be a major success, an attack on a Libyan airfield which saw dozens of enemy aircraft destroyed. And in January 1943, following the capture of Colonel David Stirling, Mayne took over the command of the SAS, going on to lead his men in campaigns in Sicily and Italy before the SAS took part in the D-Day landings. These are just a couple of examples of the conspicuous bravery displayed by Mayne in his leadership of the SAS. It is important to remember too, for Mayne and all the members of this elite regiment, being apprehended by the Nazis from 1942 onwards would likely mean their summary execution at the hands of their captors. Consistently operating under such conditions requires, without doubt, exceptional bravery. Mayne is already one of our most decorated veterans. He was one of only 8 people during the Second World War to be awarded the Distinguished Service Order on 4 occasions, at the time the second highest gallantry award behind the Victoria Cross. This serves as an important testament to the consistency of his bravery, leadership and resolve, often in the face of the odds stacked against him. It is only right and fair that we honour that courage today through the award of a posthumous Victoria Cross. Indeed, the award of a Victoria Cross would honour not just Mayne, but also in many ways the role of our special forces writ large, both historically and to this day. For many people, their knowledge and understanding of the SAS will have been informed by the BBC's dramatisation of the regiment's founding, SAS Rogue Heroes, that honourable members have already extolled. It's had an important impact, highlighting the enormous contribution of the SAS in securing the freedom we celebrate today and protecting it still. And it has also highlighted the important work of the BBC in bringing stories such as these to the public's attention, impressing on all of us the sacrifices and courage of our armed forces. There are now only a few remaining living veterans of that greatest generation who can recall their stories and remind us of the price which they, as so many others, paid to defend our way of life. Indeed, just last month, we said goodbye to another Paddy, Group Captain John Paddy Hemingway, the last surviving pilot of the Battle of Britain, who, as part of the RAF, defeated the Luftwaffe and defended our country from invasion. We have a responsibility to champion their voices and their deeds, and to continue to recognise acts of outstanding valour and heroism in our armed forces, and that is why I warmly support the award of a posthumous Victoria Cross to Blair Mayne. The decoration that King George VI said has so strangely eluded him, but is within our gift to correct. Thank you.
Minister Rebecca Smith.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And like everybody else in the room, I'd like to thank the Honourable Member for Strangford for bringing this debate this afternoon on the final day before Easter. I think for everybody in the room, we've really enjoyed listening to both the stories that he has shared, but also the many other stories that have been shared across the room. And it's worth just putting on record that although I have never wanted to be a commando, I do call many of them both constituents, friends, and also I know there are many gallant members right across this House who are also my friends. But I would at the beginning of this debate just like to put on a record reference to my register of interest, because I'm going to refer to the Commonwealth War Graves Commission during this debate. I figured I'll do it at the beginning and then I don't have to mention it again. But I thought I would just start my remarks by mentioning the one Victoria Cross that I had a direct interaction with, albeit posthumously, whilst I worked for the War Graves Commission, which is another posthumous award in 2020 when an Australian ordinary seaman, which I think is something to reference. The great thing about the Victoria Cross is that it knows no record of rank. It's open for everybody. And he was awarded that VC in 2020 by the late Queen, and what was lovely about it was that the Naval Memorial was undergoing a renovation a year later, and they actually add the initials VC after those names. And so to be able to watch the lettering being created and soldered into place was particularly moving, and I think gives another example of a posthumous award that has been given. What was striking about the comments that have been made, particularly from the Honourable Member for Strangford, from South Antrim and Upper Bann, was just this repetition of this word leadership. And I don't know about you, but everybody in this room, if you're like me, will be thinking, gosh, this man was a brilliant example of some of the things that we need to show as politicians. And I've certainly felt quite inspired listening to the things that he did. As the Honourable Member for Strangford said, he was a leader of men. He was born for that time. He dominated the scene. None of the enemy remained. I mean, we don't want to be too political, but there's some great mantras there for each of us, I think. As we head into the local elections, perhaps, he defeated and destroyed the enemy indeed. However, we are here to talk about him. I've particularly enjoyed the more modern references to screenwriting, to our journalistic colleagues, the member for Scarborough and Whitby and Dumfries and Galloway, and also that link to the Falkland Islands that the member for Surrey Heath has raised. I think just being able to understand what Paddy Mayne did after he had left the SAS is particularly important. The reference to Corporal John Harper VC, and just that reminder of Winston Churchill's words, and indeed the King's words that my colleague from Spelthorne mentioned as well. So, may I use this opportunity, Madam Deputy Speaker, to place on record my and His Majesty's official opposition's unwavering support for our special forces as they exist today, as they continue to play a vital role for our country. And whilst we will always respect the requirement for operational secrecy, I am sure honourable members from both sides of this House sleep soundly, knowing that we have such highly trained and brave set of soldiers protecting the nation. Representing a constituency as I do, which is home not just to many veterans but also many serving personnel, some of whom I know take part in the most daring and dangerous missions, means being able to speak in this debate this afternoon is a real honour. So the life story of Robert Blair Mayne, or Paddy Mayne, is, by all accounts, as we have heard this afternoon, exciting, brave and just a little bit controversial. Operating in some of the most unforgiving locations in the world, for example, North Africa, and as we've heard already, the Normandy landings, highlights the vital work of the new elite commando force, the Special Air Service, that came into being during the Second World War and which Paddy Mayne was such an important member of. It is in no doubt that Lieutenant Colonel Paddy Mayne served gallantly and with distinction, something his military record clearly highlights. His Distinguished Service Order and the 3 bars, even if one of those is the whole point of this afternoon's debate, as well as receiving the Office of the Legion of Honour from the French and a Croix de Guerre from the Belgium. However, it does seem as if evidence may now exist to suggest that that 3rd DSO bar should indeed have been a VC all along. I know how important securing the appropriate level of honour for Paddy Mayne and others is to many today, those still alive who served at that time and those who fight on their behalf. Indeed, Madam Deputy Speaker, I have spent hours with one of my constituents, Ivor Foster, who believes deeply that his service as part of Bomber Command should be recognised with a distinct medal rather than a clasp on the 1939 to 45 star. And whilst I don't entirely agree with him, to this day he will not apply for that clasp, such as his desire to be recognised for his work. And in contrast, it seems like reopening Paddy Mayne's case, though, may indeed be in order. This specific case aside, our overarching position as a party is that we continue to support the independent Medalic recognition process. It is an independent honours and awards committee whose job it is to decide the nature of gallantry awards, and in the case of the Victoria Cross, it rightly remains in the gift of the sovereign. Equally, I remain reluctant for the process to become politicised or for there to be a precedent towards either overlooking history or second-guessing it. And you'll be unsurprised that, having worked for the Commonwealth War Graves Commission, I'm particularly interested in the historical facts that we need to ensure we follow. So, having spent 6 years working for the War Graves Commission across the South West, though, I want to just touch on one story which I think is helpful to what we're discussing this afternoon. Anyone familiar with the iconic CWGC headstones may be aware that many have a little small inscription at the bottom, always worth a look if you're ever in a cemetery. It's known as the personal inscription, and unfortunately I didn't think to write any examples down in my speech this afternoon, but there's a brilliant website where you can find them. But they were instituted as a way for families to personalise a headstone. And interestingly, it came about after much debate in this place regarding the uniformity of the headstones that was decided upon at the end of the First World War, and with it the lack of choice for families in how their loved one was to be commemorated. Now, definitely a story for another day, but I would recommend a deep dive into Hansard if you're at all interested. However, as the work of the Commission has continued over the decades, in some cases headstones have had to be replaced due to wear and tear. Now, with this often comes contact with the descendants of the casualty, who by definition generally didn't know the person and often didn't know their relatives either. Therefore, the Commission has set in place a policy for what to do when modern-day relatives wish to add a personal inscription to a replacement headstone. Essentially, they are not allowed to add one in if there was none, or change what was put there at the point of the original installation. Now, this decision was reached that there was a reason why the family at the time chose not to inscribe, or indeed chose the form of words that have been there for decades. And because the Commission doesn't have records of why an inscription was added, or indeed not, adding or changing it, in their belief, would alter the integrity of the commemoration. Now, I'm sharing this story as I believe it has some bearing on how posthumous gallantry awards are considered. It is my view that something this significant must reflect historical fact. Now, whilst television shows like SAS Rogue Heroes, as we've heard much about this afternoon, and indeed the latest must-see, albeit on a very different topic, adolescents, do so much to bring untold stories to the fore and get the country talking about issues that have previously not been discussed in and of themselves. Now, while these stories can promote debate, the policy and decisions made around the issues they raise must be evidence-based, consistent, and not set an unhelpful precedent. However, Madam Deputy Speaker, in this case, it does seem like compelling new evidence is coming to light that prompts a rethink. So at its core, this debate is about an individual soldier, a Northern Irish soldier from Newton Ayres who stepped up when his nation needed him. Now, I mention his birthplace, Madam Deputy Speaker, because I'm sure it will not go unnoticed by those in the chamber that whilst we stand here today celebrating the heroic actions of one SAS veteran, many veterans of that service are currently living in fear of vexatious legal action. Now, most recently, the Clonaux verdict has shone a spotlight on our Northern Ireland veterans again, and I would like to take this opportunity to place on record my thanks to the Minister for Veterans and People for his support for a judicial review of the Clonaux inquest. Protecting our veterans is something that I hope carries unanimous support, and I know the Minister himself is a passionate advocate for veterans' affairs. I hope that his experience and judgment is already being sought by his colleagues in the Northern Ireland office, and perhaps he may advise them to reconsider their plans to repeal the Northern Ireland Legacy Act. As already mentioned, this debate also provides another opportunity to debate our record on veterans' affairs as a country. The previous Conservative government set a new standard for supporting veterans, the creation of the Office for Veterans Affairs, a Veterans Minister around the Cabinet table, the introduction of veteran ID cards, and Up Courage to support mental health services for veterans, no doubt many of which would have been the colleagues of Paddy Mayne had that service existed back then. Our record of backing those who stand up and serve is a matter of public record, and I welcome the commitment of the party opposite for much of that work. However, Madam Deputy Speaker, before I conclude, I want to use this opportunity to highlight just one issue which the Government might like to give some attention to around these Second World War veterans. As we approach the 80th anniversaries of VE and VJ Day, it is vital that we keep in mind the less than 70,000 veterans of World War II, those who survived, unlike some of the colleagues of Paddy Mayne, who are still alive. These men and women, as we know, are highly likely to be fast approaching or indeed have reached the incredible age of 100. And that brings me back to my constituent Ivor Foster. Just a few weeks ago, I visited Ivor at his care home as he remains exercised about the cost of his social care. Having lived to the ripe old age of 99 years and 8 months, he is spending £5,000 a month to live in a local care home. There are a range of reasons for this, but I do believe that ahead of the 8th of May, Ivor's case highlights the fact that we are fortunate enough to be living in the midst of men and women who not just lived through the war, but took part in active combat in the case of Ivor, and fortunately survived and then contributed to society afterwards. Therefore, I would gently ask the Minister, in a slightly cheeky way, Madam Deputy Speaker, what consideration has been given to how we acknowledge and show our gratitude to those less than 70,000 individuals who are still alive as we mark the anniversary of the liberation that they and Paddy Mayne fought for. In conclusion, Madam Deputy Speaker, I am grateful to the Honourable Member for Strangford for the opportunity to contribute to this debate. Given both my constituency links to our commando forces as the home of Royal Marines 4-2 Commando and my previous career with the War Graves Commission, I am a passionate advocate for Veterans Affairs, so it has been an honour to stand at this dispatch box and debate such an important topic. Cases like this rightly cause a debate, and I am pleased that we have been able to have this conversation today, not least because it has given us another opportunity to express on record the commitment and gratitude that we share across this House for the brave men and women who serve and have served our country in the armed forces. We owe it to all serving personnel and veterans to ensure that gallantry medals and awards at all levels are presented where the evidence is irrefutable to ensure that their intrinsic value is maintained. It seems the story of Paddy Mayne may do just that, and I wait with interest to hear the Minister's response.
Minister, Alistair Carns.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker, and thank you very much to the Honourable Member of Strangford for bringing this very important debate to this place today. It's really important that we shine a light on this issue, and I have the greatest respect for the sustained and passionate advocacy in support of a posthumous Victoria Cross for Lieutenant Colonel Robert Blair Mayne. I'd also like to fully associate myself with the powerful tribute the Honourable Member has made, as have many in the House today, have paid to Lieutenant Colonel Mayne, who was without doubt one of the greatest heroes of the Second World War, whose legacy lives on in the spirit of the Special Air Service today, and whose courage and accomplishments were rightly celebrated for our generation by the portrayal, although slightly dramatised perhaps, in the recent BBC drama SAS Rogue Heroes. Firstly, I think it would be worthwhile, particularly pertinent, that Lieutenant Colonel Mayne was recognised for his bravery at the time. He is one of the very few recipients of the rare third bar to the Distinguished Service Order. I only have one. He had 3. In recognition of his actions as commander of the 1st SAS Regiment during Operation Howard in April 1945, and it should be remembered that this made him one of the Army's most highly decorated officers of that time. Secondly, while it is possible to give gallantry awards posthumely, it is a key tenet of the British Honours and Awards system that they are not granted retrospectively. This ensures that awards are timely and clearly linked to specific actions or activities, and awarded in particular within the context of that time. And as I have mentioned many times in this debate, specifically when talking about Northern Ireland and various inquests and inquiries, it's their responsibility to understand the context of Northern Ireland at the height of the Troubles. It's also us in this warm place, sat on these wonderful benches, to understand the context of which the senior generals made those decisions around gallantry medals. For gallantry awards, as well as civilian and military honours, the guiding principle is they will not be considered more than 5 years after the incident in question. And finally, it's worth recalling that all significant battles and operations which take place in the Second World War were discussed in great deal in the context of medal recognition at the end of the war. It is worth noting that out of all the years of war, it was only in 1945 that more Victoria Crosses were awarded posthumously than those living. After years of war, many had seen conflict, courage and commitment to service, and whilst it's not necessarily fact, the bar, no pun intended, for VCs was statistically higher at the end of the war. It is worth noting that in June 1946 it was recommended that no further recommendations for gallantry awards should be considered after 1950. From what we know from the paperwork that exists about Lieutenant Colonel Mayne's recommendation for a Victoria Cross, there is lots of speculation that appropriate processes were not followed or that an administrative error took place. The evidence we have suggests that Lieutenant Colonel Mayne's citation passed through the correct chain of command and was properly considered by a succession of senior officers, all of whom were experienced and had a lot of combat experience both in leadership and the field, in consideration of medallic recognition and gallantry awards after many years of hard fighting during the Second World War. I thought it may just be worthwhile bringing forward some of those correspondence. Certain correspondence held by the Canadian National Archives from the Deputy Military Secretary to his counterpart in the 1st Canadian Army reveals some doubt about the VC and the discussion between the members of the VC Committee. It states that the VC Committee considered it not quite clearly up to VC standard and it was not a single-handed act of heroism. In the letter, which brings a point about single or signal, in the letter, the Deputy Military Secretary also suggests the award of the 3rd bar to the DSO. While it cannot be known for certain if this is the reason the VC was amended to DSO in the 3rd bar form, it is likely. So it's clear that at some point in the process, it was considered more appropriate that Lieutenant Colonel Mayne was awarded a 3rd bar to his DSO, itself an exceptionally high honour. And that was a decision that was signed off by Field Marshal Montgomery himself, who had considerable combat experience throughout the whole of the conflict. We also know that it was not uncommon at the time for a recommended level of award to be changed as the citation went through the consideration process. Today, that process remains relatively similar. And I've sat on many of these Honours and Awards committees in my time in the military. Honours and Awards committees at unit level will sit, they then at brigade and division will rank awards against the context from their own particular perspective. A unit may have to deal with 20, a brigade 60, a division 100. And we don't necessarily know the totality of the picture at the time that Lieutenant Colonel Paddy Mayne's citation was considered at each level. There may have been stiff competition, for example, across some of the broader military, in particular the Army. I actually fully respect all those who disagree with the decision that was made in relation to Lieutenant Colonel Paddy Mayne. However, I believe it is credible to conclude that Lieutenant Colonel Robert Mayne was a war hero of the absolute highest order, whilst also concluding that in some cases it's not appropriate for officers, officials, or indeed ministers working in the day some 80 years later to overrule the decisions made by senior officers at the time, who were steeped in wartime experience and had a contemporary appreciation of the brave actions of Lieutenant Colonel Mayne, and importantly his peers. I think there's some fantastic points brought out today in what is a really important important debate. Winston Churchill casts a shadow over those who perhaps didn't get a medal, and for everybody who did, there's probably 100, if not 1,000, who deserved one who definitely didn't. Interestingly, Australia has been raised twice. The Honourable Member mentioned the Australian precedent. However, Australia's separate honours system does not have any impact on UK policy. Australia not only bestowed one VC retrospectively for Vietnam, but as rightly mentioned, the Australian bestowed a second retrospective Victoria Cross on Ordinary Seaman Edward Sheehan, a sailor killed in 1942, which talks about the VC having no boundaries across services or indeed domains. It was news to me about the Falkland Islands, and I'm sure Paddy Mayne enjoyed the isolation and the camaraderie of a small team wandering around those pretty barren places, but amazing places. The Bomber Command Medal highlights an example of how divisive the medals in the honours system can be, and I'm sure those with military service can remember multiple different conversations about who got and who didn't. It's worth noting when we talk about honouring those that served in the Second World War, just today at Piccadilly Circus we had a lot of the World War II veterans up on the main screens in that major square for thousands to see, honouring the veterans who served during the Second World War. I would also conclude that combat, as mentioned earlier, can bring the best and indeed the worst out of us. And I would also argue, and I've said several times in the House, that courage is a decision, not a reaction. And it was clear to me that Lieutenant Colonel Mayne made multiple decisions that were deeply courageous. They weren't just reactions or of habit. Indeed, they probably became habit. He did it so often. So to conclude, I'm extremely grateful for the Honourable Member of Strangford for the opportunity he's given us all today to mark and lionise the incredible bravery, leadership and spirit demonstrated by Lieutenant Colonel Mayne some 80 years ago. Robert Blair Mayne was simply one of the greatest, from our greatest generation, a man of audacity, ingenuity and fearsome courageousness. His raids behind enemy lines and the courage to rescue injured comrades under fire is the stuff of military legend. A man whose spirit lives on in the Who Dares Wins motto of the SAS. The proud history of the SAS marks them out as one of the most battle-hardened and professional organisations of their time, and the very tip of the spear. Paddy Mayne is not only a hero within his regiment, but is a national hero. And he reminds me of a saying which mentioned early on, that in times of peace we must protect the mavericks. It is recognised, and I do note, that clerical mistakes in judgments or orders, or indeed errors arising from any accidental slip or omission in language, explicitly permits fixing such errors with no time limit, as long as the intent of the original decision holds. And so, as a Member of Parliament, who has a mention in dispatches, a military cross and a DSO, I will therefore take note of this new evidence that's been highlighted and the context of which it sits, and under the exceptional circumstances of this debate. And I will ask the Honours and Awards Committee to review the evidence and look to find a decision, but once the decision is found by that independent body, it will be finalised. And I think that will provide us an answer once and for all on Paddy Mayne's both service and indeed how it's recognised. There was lots of discussions today about let's have a look at the evidence with fresh eyes in the context. Let's have a look, a cool calculated review, and let's have a review of the historical facts. Madam Deputy Speaker, I will go away, the Honours and Awards Committee will do that, and we will present that evidence in this House. So I'd like to thank the Honourable Member for our debate today. Lieutenant Colonel Robert Blair Mayne is a man whose spirit and legend will remain in the annals of the Mother of Parliaments and in perpetuity. Thank you.
Jim Shannon to wind up.
Thank you, Madam. I wasn't quite sure if I got the chance to wind up, but thank you very much for giving me that opportunity. I appreciate it. Can I first of all thank all right honourable and honourable members for their contributions. I learned today, for instance, that I didn't know, by the way, he served in the Falklands. That was the first time I ever knew that. I look forward to showing that to some of the family. Can I say to everyone, thank you for spending your Tuesday afternoon before recess in this chamber and given the chance to have Blair Mayne's posthumous VC to be reviewed. Can we thank very much the Honourable and Gallant Minister for agreeing to do that. We're deeply indebted to him. I think the family back home, and for us in Newton Ards and the constituency of Strangford, Madam Deputy Speaker, where that good son, that son we're proud of, came from, we look very much forward to a successful conclusion to that review of it all. And I wish, if I can, Madam, every right honourable member have a very good recess. Rest yourselves. I know I won't, but that's by the way. But I wish you all have a nice time, a restful time, and come back here energised for the new session. Thank you.
Thank the honourable member for his inspiring Easter wind-up. The question is, as on the order paper, as many as of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it.